Gonna be in Boston.
Hey everybody, my favorite weekend of the year, the WBUR Kids Podcast Festival, the super awesome, wicked cool podcast playdate is in Boston, and it's in February this year, and Mick Sullivan, will be there. The Past and the Curious live. Music, stories, quiz time, the whole bit. It's gonna be a blast. So if you're nearby, or you've been thinking about going, this is the time. I'll be live on stage Sunday, February 16th at noon. And I'll be hanging around the festival to meet you as well. The fest starts Saturday and features Circle Round, The Big Fib, But Why, Terrestrials, and Greeking Out. Oh, and The Past and the Curious. It all happens at WBUR City Stage, and I'm really excited to perform. Live The Past and the Curious. It's always so much fun. And this year, we might just have a visit from Dr. Awkward. More details on my website, but also at WBUR's. I really hope to see you on February 16th in Boston.
The mega awesome, super huge, wicked fun podcast play date. Yeah.
Hi, friends. Are you looking for a new podcast? Maybe something you can share with your littles? Something that has some storytelling in it? Well, then look no further. We have Storytime with Philip and Mommy, where my son and I sit and discuss all the great books that you might love while we read them. So, Little Golden Books, Berenstain Bears, and even the new classics like Bluey. We sit down, we read, we discuss, and we have so much fun doing it. Come and join us. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Hey, and welcome to The Past and the Curious. My name is Mick Sullivan, and this is the 102nd episode. I'm going to feature two really interesting people. Benjamin Banneker is someone that I've wanted to feature for years. He's been on my list. I have a working list that I run through. And it's a really fascinating story. He was a free black American in the time of the American Revolution, or right after the American Revolution. No, he lived before that too, obviously. But he he created the first striking clock in the United States, along with a whole bunch of other things. The other story is by popular request. I gotta say, I get, I think, more requests than any from New Zealanders, which is awesome. So hello, New Zealand. What's up, everybody? I found an interesting New Zealander that I felt I was able to tell his story. There's a lot of things I don't know about New Zealand, but this was a story that I felt I could tell in a pretty good way. And it was really fun to learn about Richard Pearse, a pioneer in flight. So buckle up. Clocks. It's easy to take them for granted, right? I mean, take a look around and see how many different ways you can check the time in your surroundings right now. I'd bet it's quite a few. Maybe you've got one on your wall, or your bedside table, or the microwave. Or if you're in the car, there's probably one right there on the dashboard. Of course, if you're like me, there's only a 50-50 chance that one's actually correct. Setting the time back and forth each daylight savings doesn't happen with every clock in my life. But if your car clock is wrong, no bother, just look out the window. There's probably a sign at a bank or another business showing the time somewhere within eyesight. And of course, most people these days probably check the time most often on their phone or another similar digital device. Almost all of these timepieces, except for maybe the clock on your wall or wrist, are digital. They show numbers or digits to tell you the current hour and minute. Digital clocks really came into people's lives throughout the 1900s. Analog clocks, the round ones with the hour and minute hand that go in a circle, are older, and to be honest, kind of a mechanical marvel. All of this is to say that in homes of the past, clocks were not very common. If you grew up before the 1800s, it was pretty likely that if there was a clock in your life, it was on a tower in a town, probably a church or a courthouse. Not many people had clocks of their own. So, when a guy named Benjamin Banneker saw his friend's new pocket watch in the 1750s, he was fascinated. This watch had been imported from England, and practically any other clock or watch in America at that time had been as well. There were quite a few highly skilled and dedicated craftspeople in Europe who knew the delicate details of gears and springs and metal fittings and perfect ratios. This watch was pretty amazing to Benjamin.
Do you mind if I take it apart?
What? You mean like break it? No.
No, man, I don't want to break it. I want to see how it works.
Sounds like you're gonna break it. Do you even know how to put a clock together?
Well, no. That's why I want to take it apart.
But, that doesn't sound good to me. It was expensive. It's rare. Ben, it's my new pocket watch.
I know. I've never seen one like this up close, and it is awesome.
Right, but do you see the problem? You want to take it apart, but you don't know how it works. I want to keep my watch functioning like the expensive watch that it is. This just doesn't seem like a win for me. What if you can't put it back together?
I think I can figure it out.
Somehow, Benjamin Banneker convinced his pal to let him take the watch apart to learn how it worked. His buddy probably thought that was the end of his short relationship with this watch, but Benjamin was meticulous. As he took the complex yet small machine apart, he made detailed drawings and diagrams, all by hand, for his use later. With everything neatly in pieces, Benjamin could understand how the cogs and gears worked when the timepiece was wound, and how it kept accurate time as the minutes and hours of each day went by. Satisfied, he carefully put everything back together, and sure enough, it worked like a charm. So he gave it back to his pal, who was certainly pleased to hear it ticking as it once had. Benjamin couldn't help but want one himself, and with the drawings he made, he basically had a set of plans. If only he could create something so perfect and delicate. It would take time and materials, but he didn't have the resources to create one with metals. He did have wood, though. Maybe he could make that work. Amazingly, Benjamin carefully crafted the pieces of a clock and assembled it from wood. And sure enough, his wooden clock, it kept time perfectly. His was a striking clock, meaning it could sound an alarm on the hour, and for that he did have some metal, an iron bell, struck to make the noise. Benjamin Banneker's clock, which he made in 1753 while he was in his 20s, was the very first striking clock made anywhere in America, and this clock would keep time for the rest of Benjamin Banneker's life. The people who knew Benjamin were probably not surprised. He was smart, that was clear. He always had been. Benjamin had been born in Maryland in 1731, 4 decades before American independence. His parents were black and free, which meant Benjamin Banneker was too. 130 years before the Civil War, Benjamin Banneker's family was not enslaved. They weren't alone in their freedom, but it was not common. There's a lot of mystery about his early life. He probably went to school, but probably just in the winters. During the warm months, there was too much work to do on the family farm. If he did go to school, it didn't last long. But, as you might guess from his clock deconstruction efforts, he had a curious and mathematical mind, and he was always eager to read and understand the world around him. As an adult, he took over the family farm near Baltimore and became friends with a family who moved nearby to operate a mill. The Ellicott family were Quakers, and they believed in industriousness, equality, and education. So they had a lot of books and even some scientific equipment, which they lent to the now full-grown Banneker. Astronomy had captured his imagination, and after his duties running his farm, Benjamin threw himself into the study. With no formal training and little more than the books that he could borrow or buy, he began recording astronomical observations, working hard to understand the movement of the celestial bodies in the sky. In 1789, he predicted a solar eclipse. This is notable because there were other, more schooled and published astronomers who disagreed. Were they right? They were worse than right. They were wrong. Benjamin's prediction was correct. Most sources say the day of Banneker's predicted eclipse was April 14th, 1789. If so, that's curious because that happens to be the very same day that George Washington, back home in Mount Vernon, learned that he was unanimously elected as the first president of the United States. By 1791, 2 years later, Benjamin had ventured into publishing. Connecting his growing knowledge of astronomy, farming, and general information, he published the first of many farmers' almanacs. Banneker's Almanac, officially known as Banneker's Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia Almanac, or Ephemeris, was one of many such annually released books. These usually had valuable information for farmers, like seasonal trends, sunrise and sunset charts, weather predictions, tide charts, and the like. Where other almanacs also had poems or stories, Banneker's was unique in that it included political and social commentary. Much of that commentary was about the unjust treatment of other Black Americans held in bondage. And Benjamin Banneker sent a copy of his detailed almanac, along with a detailed letter, directly to Thomas Jefferson. In his famous booklet, Notes on the State of Virginia, Jefferson stated a racist belief about the superiority of white people. Banneker called him out on it and said it was blatantly wrong. He said Jefferson was duty-bound to do what he could as then Secretary of State and one of the most powerful men in America to help fix the unjust enslavement of so many humans. Jefferson was impressed and commended Benjamin Banneker, but he did not retract his statements. It was also around this time that Thomas Jefferson had brokered a deal, primarily between James Madison and a guy named Alexander Hamilton, to determine where America would place its permanent capital. A new district was carved out of Maryland and Virginia, mostly swampland, but it would become Washington, D.C. However, before a city can be made and stones can be laid, the land must be surveyed. A surveying crew would have to spend months in the physical space measuring land elevations, distances, natural features, and then map all of this. This was an important, three-dimensional mathematical job for a crack team. Chosen to lead the job was Andrew Ellicott, one of the Ellicott family members Benjamin had befriended years ago. And who did he hire to work on the surveying crew? None other than Benjamin Banneker, now 60 years old. After the surveying work of Washington, D.C. was complete, Banneker returned home, where his clock still kept time. He tended to his farm, entertained visitors, and continued to study science. It seems around this time he also took an interest in the cycle of those occasional bug invaders, cicadas. As his clock ticked, he continued to publish his almanac for a few more years, and wrote often in favor of the anti-slavery movement. On October 19, 1806, Benjamin Banneker died. On the day of his funeral, or the following day, depending on the source, his cabin caught fire and burned. Among the valuable things lost that day were his letters and journals. All evidence would indicate that his wooden clock burned that day as well. Today in Oella, Maryland, there is an obelisk dedicated in his honor, not far from his unmarked grave in the family plot. Benjamin Banneker is remembered as a polymath, extremely talented in more ways than one, and someone who left his mark on the world and worked for justice and knowledge. And that is definitely worth celebrating. Well, Happy New Year, everyone! Parents, if you're like me, the new year might be a time to refocus on education for the young ones in your life. Do you want to set up your child for success? Or is your child struggling with or just in need of help with a particular subject? Well, IXL Learning is an online learning program that enriches your homeschool curriculum, offering practice in math, English language arts, sciences, and social studies while adapting to each child and meeting them where they are. It's easy to use, it's time-saving. Everything on IXL is organized by grade, subject, topic, subtopic. It's really easy to find activities for the skills you are covering. It's also flexible and personalized and fun. Kids can explore any topic in any grade level, and they aren't forced into a single learning path like they are with other programs. There's also positive feedback, awards, and educational games, which really boosts the fun. So make an impact on your child's learning and get IXL now. And the Past and the Curious listeners can get an exclusive 20% off IXL membership when they sign up today at www.ixl.com/curious. So visit www.ixl.com/curious to get the most effective learning program out there for the best price.
Hey, it's Deborah at the Big Fib. Lisa and I will be live and on stage with Mick from the Past and the Curious at WBUR's The Mega Awesome Super Huge Wicked Fun Podcast Playdate in February. Check out the Big Fib on Saturday, February 15th, and Mick on Sunday, February 16th at WBUR's City Space in Boston. For tickets to see the Big Fib live, as well as Mick at the Past and the Curious and other fantastic podcasts, go to wbur.org/events. Hope to see you there.
And now it's time for everyone's favorite guest-voiced segment, which lasts 1/2 of a minute. Catherine Rose, you have 30 seconds.
Hi, my name is Catherine Rose, and I'm from Columbus, Ohio, and I'm here to tell you about Satoshi Tajiri. Satoshi Tajiri loved books. He created this gaming magazine called Game Freak. He had this idea for a game where trainers can collect and trade bugs. He took it to Nintendo to try to turn it into a game, but they didn't like it. But this one guy, Ken, he said that Satoshi should tinker with the idea a little bit, and they worked together, and they created the Pokemon we know and love today. Bye!
You did it! Great job! 30 seconds, a lot of information, a lot of interesting information. I did not know the backstory to Pokemon, but I'm glad that I do now. Thank you for sharing that with me and everyone. Great job. If you have a 30 seconds out there anywhere, all you got to do is hit record on a digital device. Or, if you have an audio cassette, I guess you could. You can mail it to me, but it's probably easier just to record it on a smartphone or a computer and send it to me via email. Hello at the Past and the Curious.
It's quiz time. It's quiz time. It's quiz time. Time.
Welcome back to Quiz Time, the triumphant return of Quiz Time after a 1-episode break. By popular request, I heard about it. Okay, so question number 1. Let's get started. Jump right in. What is the last country on Earth to have been populated by human beings? People. Humans. Y'all, it was New Zealand. People finally arrived to that island only about 800 years ago. Polynesians made their way to New Zealand and settled there between 1280 and 1330. So around that same time, elsewhere in the world, the Mali Empire in Africa, under King Mansa Musa, reached its height, and Marco Polo traveled to China and met Kublai Khan. So there was a lot going on around that time. All right, question number 2. What is the first country to pass a law for women's suffrage, meaning women could vote in political matters? Once again, the answer is New Zealand. Decades ahead of others, New Zealand was the first in 1893. It took 20 years of hard work, but that same year, the city of Onehunga elected Elizabeth Yates to be mayor, and she was the first woman to hold that position in all of the British Empire. All right, so as you probably guessed, these questions are about New Zealand. So here's a curveball question, question number 3. On the far northern tip of the northern island of New Zealand sits the beautiful 90 Mile Beach. How long is 90 Mile Beach? I think this one is funny because New Zealand uses the metric system, but it's even funnier because 90 Mile Beach is actually 88 kilometers or 55 miles long. 90 Mile Beach, 55 miles long. So don't be fooled by a name. If you're looking for long-lost history, sometimes you might have to go looking through the trash. Luckily, a New Zealand man named George Bump didn't mind getting his hands dirty, and in 1958, he pulled aviation history from a rubbish dump. As a pilot and airplane enthusiast himself, Mr. Bump knew what he was looking at. Not trash, but a remarkable, one-of-a-kind engine designed by a cello-playing farmer who may or may not have been the first person to fly a motorized airplane. That cello-playing farmer was Richard Pearse. And his achievements in flight are not as well known as his contemporaries like Wilbur and Orville Wright. But perhaps his feats were more impressive because he crafted his aircraft mostly alone, mostly from recycled parts, and without access to most of the information scientists at the time were sharing about flying. Luckily, Mr. Bump saved Richard Pearse's engine from the rubbish heap of history and found a few more of Pearse's things over the years. So here's some advice. If you ever invent things, discover things, create things, or are responsible for any advancement of any sort, you should keep notes. Documents are proof, and they make great tools for historians to organize timelines to understand the past. Unfortunately, Richard Pearse didn't keep great records, so few artifacts and documents survive today. In order to piece his story together, Mr. Bump and a few others interviewed a few witnesses, many years after Pearse's experiments. And their memories seem clear for the most part, especially the one about Richard Pearse's plane crashed and stuck tail side up in a hedgerow. Now, no one is sure, but Richard Pearse might have flown his airplane months before Orville and Wilbur made history at Kitty Hawk. But we just don't know. Richard Pearse grew up with very curly hair on a New Zealand farm near the town of Temeka. It was remote, not a lot of people around, as the many big farms there spaced everyone out, so the neighbors were really far away. Luckily, Richard had a bunch of brothers and sisters. He was somewhere in the middle of 9 kids, and having this many kids on a farm was probably good. Lots of help with the work. But the family liked to enjoy their life too, not just spend their time on chores. So they built a tennis court and would have family tennis tournaments to blow off steam. One of his brothers was so good with the racket that he went professional. But the family also had an artistic side. All the kids learned music and started a family orchestra. There were Pearse siblings on harp, piano, violins, violas, and Richard on the cello. His cello was a great treasure to him, which he would keep and play for the rest of his life. Richard liked to enjoy life a little more than he liked working on the farm, but not in a slackery, lazy kind of way. Enjoying life for him was disappearing into his own mind and getting mechanical.
Cello, I'm Richard Pearse.
No, I don't mean Richard pretended to turn into a robot. I mean he got mechanical with his creativity. Richard was a tinkerer. If his parents could have sent him to college, he probably would have made a good engineer. He liked to design, build, and solve problems. So if the family lost track of him, they'd probably find him in the barn inventing something new. Maybe even a tool to help on the farm. For that reason, things that broke on the Pearse farm were never discarded. They were reused. At the library, Richard would learn what he could about science, mathematics, and engineering. This drive to learn is something he carried with him through life, just like that cello. When he grew up and kept a farm of his own, he had very little interest in actually farming. He often hired people to help with that part. This gave him time to focus on whatever he wanted to focus on. Townsfolk remember him running errands with a book in his hand, which he'd bury his nose in at any small chance, like waiting in line or at a train crossing. Most found him odd, but interesting, just like his early inventions.
Hello, I'm Richard Pearse, and have I got something to show you. Are you tired of moving your bike by pedaling in circles? Your feet, they just go round and round and round. Am I right? What if I told you instead that your feet could go up and down? Sounds great, right? Well, now they can. With my new bamboo bicycle, you just pump the pedals up and down to move yourself. It's up and downright amazing. And this is the best part. No more flat tires as you make your way around town, you busy cyclist. The tires are self-inflating. They can even inflate while you are in motion. No need to stop.
Richard's bamboo frame bike was a really great idea, but it never really took off. Part of the reason might be because he was a little more obsessed with getting something else off of the ground instead. An airplane. From a hodgepodge of materials, Richard worked to build a plane. He knew other people were working on planes of their own around the world, but he was working mostly alone and far away from all of them. And that made him unusual. Yes, unusual in the history books, in a good way, and unusual to the people in his area in a not-so-good way. Most people thought Richard was bananas.
As a farmer, shouldn't he spend his time worrying about, farming?
What's the point in creating something that's never gonna work?
Never gonna work was one viewpoint. Shouldn't work was another. More than a handful of people felt he was behaving blasphemously.
If people were meant to fly, then God would have made them fly.
Some believed creating such a vehicle was against the laws of nature and their creator. But it seems like it was easy for Richard to tune them out because he built a plane. Amazingly, he was working on it at the same time the Wright brothers were working on theirs. And like them, he had built and worked on bicycles. Some bicycle, or rather tricycle, inspiration wound up on Richard's plane. It had one pair of wings connected and very high above where the pilot sat. There was a bike seat at the bottom of a tubular steel frame, which also had 3 bicycle tires. He had gotten some pointers from a mechanic in the area when it came to the engine. This was a point of pride for Richard. It was made of many recycled parts, including some old drain pipe, and he believed that it was the best, lightest engine in the world at the time, meaning it was very powerful while also not being very heavy, which is a good benefit for an airplane. Especially an airplane made of bamboo. It's hard to know exactly when he made his first attempt at flight. As we mentioned, not many records remain. All we have is the recollection of witnesses, and sometimes memories can be spotty, many years after the fact. Some of the people there were neighbors. A few family members were probably there too. Some remembered that a local teacher canceled her classes and took some of the students to watch. Most agree about what they saw, but all agree about what they heard. The machine was so unbelievably loud that the grating, rattling cacophony of harsh metal echoed from New Zealand hilltops and across the fields in all directions. Whenever he had been working, people for miles around knew it. And they certainly heard it when he readied his plane to fly above a field not far from the town of Waitohi. The engine started, the propeller spun, and the winged bamboo machine began to move. Jostling and bouncing on the ground, he gained speed until the bicycle tires left the earth, and as he rose, the air was no less violent. Richard and his plane were still jostling and rocking. Try as he might, he never really got control, but he flew about 100 meters, around 330 feet. And then he came down, right into a hedgerow. Tail up, nose in the plant, a classic crash landing. Someone took a photo because who had ever seen such a thing before? Richard worried that he might have dislocated his shoulder in the impact, so he went to the hospital before extracting his plane. Dude just got a little banged up. This might have happened a few months before the Wright brothers. It might have happened a few months or even a year after. We just don't know for sure because the evidence we have is scant. The photo might have been a key, and the logbook from the hospital certainly would have had the date of Richard's crash-related injury, but the photo was lost in a house flood, and the hospital burned down, along with all the paper records kept inside. Richard didn't leave us the date on any related documents, so all we have is people's memories, and as we've already said, memories can be faulty. But here's the thing. We know how Richard felt about it. The date didn't matter. He said he wasn't the first in controlled motorized flight. In any case, it probably was still the Wrights.
Cello, I never had control.
And that is the key. He could have lied. He could have raised a fuss. He could have forced himself into the history books, but he wasn't that kind of guy. He knew he never had control of the flight. He probably considered himself lucky that he survived in the first place. Richard was honest, if unsatisfied with his work, which is honorable. Plenty of other people should take note of that. Richard set that plane aside, but he didn't stop entirely. He actually spent the later years of his life working on a new plane, a radical one with a propeller system that could shift from facing forward to facing up above the pilot, not unlike a helicopter. This would allow it to take off from any location, with a runway or without, straight up from a hilltop, for instance. It also had wings that could fold up so it could fit in a typical barn. His dream was to create a plane that would make flying as easy and accessible to everyone as cars had done for driving. For the most part, that dream died with him when he passed away in 1953. But the memory of his place in early flight has not. He's often honored in New Zealand for his achievements and creative spirit, and many of his surviving engine and plane pieces are in museums there. Many thanks to George Bump, who saved them from an eternity alongside trash. Richard Pearse may not have been the first in controlled airplane flight, but he knew he was a leader, and that New Zealand minds like his belonged in the conversation. He wrote this to a New Zealand newspaper over a decade after his first flight.
I may say that my object is to show that New Zealand brains anticipated the essential features of the airplane. If I have claimed anything unduly, I want to know it, as I am open to correction. All my experimenting in aerial navigation was pioneer work, and when a history of the pioneers is being written, I hold that I am within my rights in asserting my claims.
Claim heard, Richard Pearse. Now, we all know your name. Well, all right, that was the 102th episode of The Past and the Curious. Thank you so much for listening. My name is Mick Sullivan, and I make this show for you. It makes me happy, and I hope it makes you happy too. I have some people to thank, some Patreon people. First off, Brennan Feiner in New Jersey. Hello to you, and thank you for your support. I really, really appreciate it. And I believe we heard you auto 30 seconds, if I'm not mistaken, or we will. Also, Arwen here in Louisville. Arwen, my buddy, what's up? Met you a few times. It's great. Thank you for your support. I'm so glad that you enjoy the show, Arwen. If you can make it to Boston, talking February 16th, 2025. Really looking forward to it. I've built a new program that's actually like a multimedia experience with original music, telling a story that I told in one of the very first, actually might have been the first full episode of The Past and the Curious. So I am very excited about that, to bring it all the way back. But I'm also going to be taking it on the road. So if you're near Chicago, or you're near, well, we'll just say near Chicago for now. It looks pretty certain that I'll be there in early April. So more details to come on that, and then working on a few other dates. So hope to see you. I'll be at the Fraser History Museum in Louisville on February 7th doing test running it. So if you want to come, you can call the museum for details about that. But otherwise, I really appreciate it. It's been a fun episode to put together, and I'm looking forward to seeing some of you out on the road. Thank you very much. I'm Mick Sullivan.
Do you find it hard to sleep at night? Then the Sleep Cove podcast can help you. Hi, I'm Christopher Fitton, the voice and clinical hypnotherapist behind Sleep Cove. Sleep Cove features sleep hypnosis, meditations, and bedtime stories, all designed to help those of you who struggle at night to achieve a restful and peaceful night's sleep. Search for Sleep Cove on Apple Podcasts or Spotify and see why Sleep Cove helps millions of people sleep deeply all night long.